All right, everybody, welcome back to Chronicles of the Realm, where we're telling stories of D&D adventures that I've run in the past. Sorry for the delay. I'm getting a new narration function for my stories, because honestly, I don't really have that much time to narrate them. But I'm welcoming you to listen to the third installment of the Obsidian Citadel. There is a continuation of the story. We do come back and revisit it in the future in some other playthroughs. One of the characters does kind of become the main character because the person running that character played all the games all the way through, and these are a series of one-shots, and that's where the story comes from. However, the players in this game have found themselves, in a bit of a pickle. They're getting to the good part of the story. So with that, buckle your seatbelts. It's time to listen to the part 3 of the Obsidian Citadel. Thank you and have a great day.
Part 3. Blood on the Snow. The screaming chasm earned its name. Wind howled up from depths that disappeared into darkness, carrying with it a sound that was almost like voices, almost like the cries of the damned. The chasm was easily 200 feet across, its walls sheer stone that gleamed with ice, and the only way across was the bridge. If you could call it that. The Widow's Bridge was ancient, its ropes frayed and rotting, its wooden slats cracked and missing in places. It swayed in the wind like a living thing, creaking and groaning, and just looking at it made Lyra's stomach clench. "You've got to be kidding me," Morrigan said. "I could try to levitate us across," the mage offered, though her voice was uncertain. "But with 6 people, the weight, the wind, I'm not sure I could maintain it." "We cross on the bridge," Kyle said. "One at a time, to minimize the weight. Rope ourselves together in case someone falls." "And if the whole thing collapses?" Crag asked. "Then we die screaming." The ranger's smile was grim. "But we were probably going to die anyway, so what's the difference?" They roped themselves together, spacing out along 50 feet of line. Kyle went first, testing each plank before putting his weight on it, moving with careful precision. The bridge swayed and bucked beneath him, but he made it across, securing the rope on the far side. Lyra went next, her light weight barely registering on the ancient structure. She moved like a dancer, flowing from plank to plank, and made it across in half the time it took Kale. Morrigan followed, her staff held out for balance, her face pale but determined. Halfway across, a plank gave way beneath her foot, and she dropped, catching herself on the ropes with a gasp. For a moment, she hung there, the wind tearing at her robes, the chasm yawning below. Then she pulled herself up and kept going. Thorgrim was next, his heavy armor making the bridge groan with every step. But the dwarf was steady, methodical, and he made it across without incident. Aldrich started across, his armor gleaming in the thin sunlight. He was halfway when Crag stepped onto the bridge behind him, and the combined weight made the entire structure shudder. "Wait!" Kyle shouted. "Too much weight. Crag, get back." But it was too late. They came from below, climbing up the sides of the chasm with claws that bit into solid ice. Ice elementals, their bodies formed from frozen water and malice, their eyes glowing with cold blue light. There were 6 of them, and they moved with terrible purpose. The first one reached the bridge and grabbed Aldrich's leg. The paladin shouted, his sword blazing as he struck down, shattering the elemental's arm. But 2 more were already climbing onto the bridge, their weight making it sway wildly. Crag roared and charged forward, his axe cleaving through an elemental's torso. It shattered like glass, but the pieces reformed, pulling themselves back together. "They're regenerating!" Morrigan shouted. Her hands wove patterns, and fire bloomed from her palms, washing over the nearest elemental. It screamed, a sound like cracking ice, and melted, but the others kept coming. An elemental grabbed Thorgrim, its touch freezing his armor, making the metal brittle. The dwarf's warhammer smashed into its face and it fell, but another took its place. Lyra was already moving, running back across the bridge with reckless speed. Her daggers found the weak points in the elementals' forms, the places where the ice was thinnest, where the magic that held them together was most vulnerable. She struck and danced away, struck and danced away, a whirlwind of motion. Kale's arrows, tipped with oil and set alight, punched through elemental bodies, the heat disrupting their forms. But there were too many, and the bridge was shaking itself apart. An elemental grabbed Crag's axe, and the metal shattered from the cold. The orc snarled and grabbed the creature with his bare hands, his enormous strength wrestling it toward the edge of the bridge. They grappled, and for a moment, it looked like Crag would win. Then the elemental's claws found his throat. Blood sprayed, hot and red, steaming in the cold air. Crag's eyes went wide with shock, and he staggered, his hands going to his neck, trying to hold in the blood that poured between his fingers. No! Thorgrim was already moving, his hands glowing with healing light, but an elemental blocked his path, its claws raking across his chest, tearing through chainmail like paper. Aldrich cut down the elemental blocking Thorgrim, his sword blazing with holy fire. "Get to Crag. I'll hold them." The paladin stood his ground, his shield raised, his sword a blur of light and steel. He was magnificent, a warrior of legend, holding the line against impossible odds. But there were too many. An elemental's claw punched through his armor, through his ribs, and Aldrich gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. He struck back, shattering the creature, but another took its place, and another. Thorgrim reached Crag, his hands pressing against the terrible wound in the orc's throat, divine light pouring from his palms. But there was too much damage, too much blood. Crag's eyes found the dwarfs, and there was something like surprise in them, like he couldn't quite believe this was how it ended. "Hold on," Thorgrim begged. "Please, lad, hold on." Crag's lips moved, forming words, but no sound came out. Only blood. His hand came up, gripped Thorgrim's shoulder, not hard, almost gentle. And then the light went out of his eyes. The orc's body slumped, and Thorgrim made a sound that was half sob, half roar. His warhammer came up, blazing with golden light, and he threw himself at the elementals with a fury born of grief. "Fall back!" Kyle was shouting. "The bridge is breaking! Fall back!" Morrigan's fire was everywhere, melting elementals faster than they could reform. Lyra's daggers flashed, and Kale's arrows flew, and slowly, desperately, they drove the creatures back. Aldrich was on his knees, blood pouring from the wound in his chest, but he was still fighting, his sword still blazing. An elemental loomed over him, its claws raised for a killing blow. "Get down!" Morrigan screamed, and Aldrich dropped. Lightning arced from the mage's hands, so bright it was blinding, so hot it turned the elemental to steam. The backlash threw Morrigan to her knees, blood running from her nose, her ears, but the elementals were retreating, driven back by fire and light and fury. Thorgrim grabbed Crag's body, hauling the orc over his shoulder with strength born of desperation. "Go, go now!" They ran, the bridge shaking itself apart beneath them. Planks fell away into the darkness, ropes snapped with sounds like whip cracks. Lyra made it across first, then Kyle, then Morrigan. Thorgrim was halfway across, Crag's body weighing him down, when the bridge gave a final, terrible groan. Aldrich was still on the far side, blood-soaked and swaying. He looked at them across the gap, and his smile was sad and knowing. "Go," he said. "Finish it, for all of us." "Aldrich, no," Thorgrim started. The paladin cut the rope. The bridge collapsed, falling away into the chasm, taking Aldrich with it. For a moment, they saw him falling, his armor catching the light, his sword still blazing. Then the darkness swallowed him, and he was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Thorgrim laid Crag's body down gently, his hands shaking. Morrigan sat with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Cale stared into the chasm, his face carved from stone. And Lyra. Lyra felt something break inside her, something she'd thought was already broken beyond repair. They'd lost two of their 6, and they hadn't even reached the Citadel yet. "We have to keep going," Kyle said finally, his voice rough. "We have to finish this. For them." "Aye," Thorgrim said quietly. He was crying, tears running into his beard, but his voice was steady. "For them. And for everyone else who'll die if we fail." They built a cairn for Crag, piling stones over his body, marking the place where he fell. Thorgrim spoke the rites of the Stone Father, his voice carrying across the mountains. "From stone we come, to stone we return. May the mountain remember you, Crag the Breaker. May your strength become part of the bedrock, your courage part of the foundation. You died a warrior's death, and you will not be forgotten." Morrigan added her own words, her voice thick with grief. "You were braver than you knew, stronger than you believed, and you deserved better than this." Lyra placed her daggers on the cairn, a wood elf tradition for honoring the fallen. "May the green places remember you. May the wild things sing your name." Kyle simply bowed his head, his hand over his heart. They stood in silence for a long moment, 4 people who'd started as strangers and become something more. Something like friends, something like family. Then they turned away from the cairn and continued north, toward the Obsidian Citadel, toward whatever waited in the dark. It was late afternoon when they saw it. The Obsidian Citadel rose from the mountain like a black tooth, a structure of dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was massive, easily the size of a small town, with towers that clawed at the sky and walls that looked like they'd been carved from a single piece of volcanic glass. And from its depths came a feeling, a wrongness that made their skin crawl and their stomachs clench. "Gods," Morrigan breathed. "I can feel it from here. The power, the corruption." "Aye," Thorgrim said, his hand on his warhammer. "Evil has made its home in that place. Old evil and strong." "Then we'd better be stronger," Kyle said. They approached cautiously, weapons ready, every sense alert. The Citadel's entrance was a massive archway, its doors long since rotted away, leaving only darkness beyond. Symbols were carved into the stone, ancient, twisted things that hurt to look at. "Demonic script," Morrigan said, studying them. "Wards and bindings. This place was built to contain something." "And now it's awake," Lyra said quietly. They entered. The interior of the Citadel was a maze of corridors and chambers, all carved from the same black stone. There was no light save what they brought with them: Morrigan's magical flame, Thorgrim's glowing warhammer. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and oppressive, and the air tasted of copper and rot. They found the first bodies in what had once been a great hall. The prospectors who'd discovered this place, their corpses torn apart, scattered across the floor like broken dolls. They'd been dead for weeks, but the cold had preserved them, and their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror. "What could do this?" Kyle asked, studying the wounds. "The Yeti," Thorgrim said. "Possessed by the demon, driven mad. They were the demon's first victims, its first tools." They pressed deeper, following a staircase that spiraled down into the mountain's heart. The wrongness grew stronger with every step, a pressure against their minds, a whisper at the edge of hearing. Morrigan's hands shook as she maintained her light, and even Thorgrim's faith seemed to waver in the face of such concentrated evil. The stairs ended in a chamber so vast they couldn't see the far walls, and in the center, bound in chains of black iron, was the demon. It had been beautiful once, perhaps, an angel before the fall, but corruption had twisted it into something monstrous, a thing of shadow and flame, with too many eyes and too many mouths, its form constantly shifting, never quite solid. The chains that bound it were covered in holy symbols, in wards and prayers, but they were weakening, cracking, and around the demon, circling like faithful hounds, were the Yeti. There were dozens of them, their white fur matted with blood, their eyes glowing red with the demon's influence. They turned as one when the four adventurers entered, and the sound they made was like nothing in nature. A chorus of screams and roars and something that might have been laughter. The demon's voice filled the chamber, filled their heads, filled the world. "Welcome, little mortals. I have been waiting for you." "Release the Yeti," Aldrich would have said if he'd been there. "Face us yourself, demon." But Aldrich was gone, and it was Thorgrim who stepped forward, his warhammer blazing with holy light. "In the name of the Stone Father, I command you, release these creatures and return to the abyss from which you came." The demon laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass, like screaming children, like the end of the world. "I think not, little priest. I have slept for 1,000 years, bound by chains and prayers. But the chains are breaking, the prayers are fading, and soon I will be free." "Not if we stop you," Morrigan said, her hands already weaving patterns of power. "You? 4 little mortals, already broken, already bleeding? You think you can stop me?" The demon's laughter grew louder. "You couldn't even save your friends. The Paladin fell screaming. The orc died choking on his own blood, and you will join them." "Maybe," Lyra said quietly, her daggers in her hands. "But we're going to make you work for it." The demon's response was to unleash the Yeti. They came in a wave of fur and claws and red glowing eyes, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Kale's arrows flew, each one finding an eye, a throat, a heart. But there were so many, and they kept coming. Morrigan's fire washed over them, burning fur and flesh, but the demon's power sustained them, kept them fighting even as they burned. Lyra was a shadow among shadows, her daggers finding the spaces between ribs, the soft places where life could be ended with a single thrust. She moved like water, like wind, always just out of reach. Thorgrim stood like a mountain, his warhammer rising and falling, each blow shattering bone, pulping flesh. He chanted prayers as he fought, calling on the Stone Father's strength, and golden light blazed from his armor. But there were too many, always too many. A Yeti's claw caught Morrigan across the back, and she went down with a scream. Kale put 3 arrows into the creature's skull, but another took its place. Lyra killed 2, 3, 4, but for every one that fell, 2 more pressed forward. They were being overwhelmed. "The chains!" Thorgrim shouted. "Destroy the chains! It's the only way!" Morrigan understood immediately. If they could break the chains, the demon would be free. But it would also be vulnerable. No longer protected by the wards, no longer able to hide behind its possessed servants. It would have to face them directly. It was insane. It was suicide. It was their only chance. "Do it!" Kyle shouted, loosing arrow after arrow to keep the Yeti at bay. Morrigan's hands wove the most powerful spell she knew, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she had. Lightning gathered around her, crackling and spitting, growing brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. "Get clear!" she screamed. The lightning lanced out, striking the chains. The black iron shattered, and the demon's scream of triumph shook the very foundations of the Citadel. "Free! Finally free!" The demon rose, its form solidifying, becoming real in a way it hadn't been before. It was massive, towering over them, its body a nightmare of shadow and flame and writhing tentacles. Its eyes, dozens of them, fixed on the four adventurers, and its smile was full of teeth. "Now you die." It struck, and only Thorgrim's hastily raised shield saved them from being incinerated. The demon's power washed over them like a wave of liquid fire, and the dwarf screamed as his armor began to melt. Kale's arrows bounced off the demon's hide. Lyra's daggers couldn't even scratch it. Morrigan threw everything she had at it: fire, ice, lightning, and it laughed. They were going to lose. Thorgrim knew it. He could feel it in his bones, in his soul. They couldn't win. Not like this. Not with just the four of them. But maybe one of them could. The dwarf's hand went to the holy symbol around his neck, and he felt the Stone Father's presence, warm and solid and eternal. He knew what he had to do. "Morrigan," he shouted. "When I tell you, hit it with everything you've got. Everything." "What are you—" "Just do it." Thorgrim charged, his warhammer blazing with every ounce of divine power he could channel. The demon turned to face him, amused, and raised a claw to swat him aside like an insect. But the dwarf wasn't trying to hurt it. He was trying to get close. He dropped his warhammer and grabbed the demon, his arms wrapping around its massive form, his armor burning, his flesh searing. He held on with all his strength, all his faith, and he began to pray. Not a prayer for protection, not a prayer for strength, a prayer of sacrifice. "Stone Father, hear me. Take my life, take my strength, take everything I am, and use it to destroy this evil. Let my death mean something. Let it save them." The demon realized what was happening and tried to pull away, but Thorgrim held on, his grip like iron, like stone. Golden light began to pour from the dwarf, brighter and brighter, and the demon screamed. "Now, Morrigan, now!" The mage didn't hesitate. She drew on every reserve of power she had, every spell she knew, every ounce of magical energy in her body. Lightning, fire, force, all of it, channeled into a single devastating blast. It struck the demon and Thorgrim together, and the explosion lit up the chamber like a newborn sun. When the light faded, the demon was gone. Destroyed. Reduced to ash and memory. And so was Thorgrim. The dwarf's armor lay on the stone floor, melted, his flesh gone. There was nothing of the dwarf left. He had literally given everything. Lyra fell to her knees beside his armor, her hands shaking. "No, no, no, no." Kyle stood frozen, his bow hanging loose in his hands. Morrigan collapsed, her magical reserves completely exhausted, tears streaming down her face. The Yeti, freed from the demon's control, fled into the darkness, their eyes no longer glowing red. The Citadel shook, the ancient stones beginning to crack and crumble. Whatever power had sustained this place was gone, and it was coming down. "We have to go," Kale said, his voice hollow. "We have to go now." There was nothing left of Thorgrim to carry. Lyra placed her hand on the dwarf's armor, feeling the stillness there, the absence of life that had been so strong. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They ran, the citadel collapsing around them, stone falling like rain. They burst out into the open air just as the entire structure imploded, falling in on itself, sealing the demon's prison forever. 3 of them stood in the snow, watching the dust settle. 3 out of 6. Lyra Shadowstep, wood elf rogue, who'd learned that trust was possible, even for someone like her. Kale Ashbourne, human ranger, who'd found something worth fighting for beyond simple survival. Morrigan Voss, human mage, who'd discovered that power meant nothing without people to use it for. They'd lost Crag the Breaker, who'd died protecting them. They'd lost Aldrich Lightbringer, who'd sacrificed himself so they could continue. They'd lost Thorgrim Ironstone, who'd given everything to destroy the demon. 3 out of 6. It would have to be enough. Part 4. The Return. The journey back to Black Peak took 4 days. They moved slowly, exhausted in body and spirit, the weight of their losses heavy on their shoulders. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? The silence between them was comfortable, at least. The silence of people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. On the second day, they passed the cairn they'd built for Crag. Lyra added a stone to it, and the others did the same. A small gesture, but it mattered. On the third day, they reached the Screaming Chasm. The bridge was gone, of course, but Morrigan had recovered enough of her strength to levitate them across one at a time. It took hours and left her drained again, but they made it. On the fourth day, they saw Black Peak in the distance, smoke rising from its chimneys, lights glowing in windows. It looked like home, even though none of them had ever lived there. They entered the town at sunset, 3 battered, bloodied figures walking down the main street. People came out of their houses, staring, and someone ran to fetch Elder Grimshaw. The old man met them in the town square, his blind eyes somehow finding each of them. 3, he said quietly. Only 3. The demon is dead, Kale said. The Yeti are free. Black Peak is safe. At what cost? 3 good people. Lyra's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. 3 heroes. Crag the Breaker, who fought to the last. Aldrich Lightbringer, who sacrificed himself so we could continue. And Thorgrim Ironstone, who gave his life to destroy the demon. Silence fell over the square. The gathered townspeople stood frozen, processing the news. A woman in the back began to weep softly. A man removed his hat and held it to his chest. Elder Grimshaw's weathered face seemed to age another decade in that moment. 3 lives for a town, 3 souls for our salvation. He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying despite its tremor. These strangers came when we called. They walked into darkness so we could remain in the light. And 3 of them will never walk out again. They died as heroes, Kyle said firmly. They died knowing what they were fighting for. That doesn't make them any less dead, a voice called from the crowd. It wasn't cruel, just honest. The brutal truth of it. Morrigan swayed slightly, and Lyra caught her elbow. The mage had pushed herself too hard on the journey back, maintaining spells to keep them warm, to purify their water, to speed their healing. She was running on fumes and willpower. Get them inside, Elder Grimshaw ordered. Food, water, warm beds. They've earned that much and more. The crowd parted as the 3 survivors were led toward the inn. People reached out to touch them as they passed, not grabbing, just gentle touches on shoulders and arms. Gestures of gratitude, of recognition, of shared grief. Inside the frozen hearth, Marta the innkeeper had already prepared a table near the fire. Hot stew, fresh bread, mulled wine. The 3 survivors sat heavily, their bodies finally acknowledging the exhaustion they'd been holding at bay. Eat, Marta said, her voice thick with emotion. You need your strength. They ate in silence at first, too tired for words. But as warmth and food began to restore them, the reality of what they'd accomplished and what it had cost began to sink in. I keep expecting to hear Thorgrim complaining about the quality of the ale, Morrigan said quietly, staring into her cup. Kale nodded. Or Aldrich lecturing us about proper table manners. Crag would have eaten all the bread by now, Lyra added, the ghost of a smile touching her lips, and then pretended he didn't. They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now, a shared remembrance. The door opened and Elder Grimshaw entered, followed by several of the town's leaders. We need to know, the old man said without preamble. What happened up there? What did you face? So they told the story. Kyle described the journey into the mountains, the encounters with the owlbears, the white dragon who became an unlikely ally. Morrigan explained the ancient fortress, the demonic presence that had awakened when the Citadel was disturbed. Lyra recounted the battles, the losses, the final confrontation. When they described Crag's death on the bridge, several people in the growing crowd gasped. When they told of Aldrich's sacrifice, holding back the demon's minions so the others could reach the ritual chamber, a woman sobbed openly. And when Morgan explained how Thorgrim had channeled all his divine power into a final prayer, destroying the demon but consuming himself in the process, even the hardest men in the room had tears in their eyes. "They saved us all," Elder Grimshaw said when the tale was finished, "and we will never forget them." "What about the Yeti?" someone asked. "Are they truly free?" "The demon is destroyed," Lyra confirmed. "The Yeti were its puppets, nothing more. They'll return to their natural patterns now. They may still be dangerous, they're predators after all, but they won't hunt with malice anymore. They won't have those red eyes." "Then we're safe," the questioner said, relief evident in his voice. "You're safe," Kyle agreed. "That's what they died for." Elder Grimshaw straightened, decision clear in his bearing. "Then we will honor them. Tomorrow night we feast, not in celebration of their deaths, but in gratitude for their sacrifice. We will tell their stories, drink to their memories, and ensure that Black Peak never forgets the price of our safety." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. The townspeople threw themselves into organizing the feast with an energy born of relief and gratitude. Tables were set up in the town square, despite the cold. Fires were built in great braziers to provide warmth. Food was prepared. More food than the small town should have been able to produce. But everyone contributed what they had. The 3 survivors spent the day resting, recovering, and trying to process what they'd been through. Lyra found herself walking the perimeter of the town, old habits dying hard. Cale sat on the inn's roof, watching the mountains, his bow across his knees. Morrigan remained in her room, writing in a journal, documenting everything that had happened while the memories were still fresh. As sunset approached, the town began to gather. The feast was laid out, and Elder Grimshaw stood before the crowd. "We gather tonight in sorrow and in gratitude," he began. 6 heroes came to our aid. 3 heroes will never leave these mountains. But because of their sacrifice, because of their courage, Black Peak endures. Our children will grow up safe. Our people will live without fear. That is the gift they gave us, purchased with their lives." He gestured to 3 empty chairs at the head table, places of honor that would remain vacant. "Tonight, we remember Crag the Breaker, Aldrich Lightbringer, and Thorgrim Ironstone. We remember their courage, their strength, and their sacrifice. And we thank the 3 who survived to bring us this news, who fought alongside their fallen companions and lived to tell the tale." The feast began, but it was unlike any celebration the survivors had experienced. There was food and drink, yes, but also tears and stories. People approached the 3 survivors throughout the night, thanking them, asking questions about the fallen heroes, sharing their own stories of loss and survival. An old woman took Lyra's hand. "My grandson was taken by the Yeti 3 months ago. He was only 12. Thank you for making sure no other grandmother loses her grandchild to those red eyes." A young man clasped Cale's shoulder. "I was going to leave Black Peak. Thought it was cursed, that we were all doomed. But you proved that courage can overcome even demons. I'm staying now. I'm going to help rebuild." A mother with a baby in her arms approached Morrigan. "She'll grow up safe because of you, because of all of you. I'll tell her about the heroes who saved our town. I'll make sure she knows their names." Each expression of gratitude was sincere, heartfelt, and utterly overwhelming. The survivors accepted the thanks with as much grace as they could muster, but the weight of it pressed down on them. They hadn't done this for glory or gratitude. They'd done it because it needed doing. And 3 good people had died in the process. As the night wore on and the wine flowed more freely, the mood shifted slightly. People began sharing happier memories, telling jokes, even laughing. Life asserting itself in the face of death. The survivors found themselves smiling despite everything, caught up in the infectious relief of a community that had been living in fear and could finally breathe again. Near midnight, Elder Grimshaw called for silence once more. Tomorrow we will hold a formal memorial for the fallen. But tonight, I ask our 3 heroes to share their memories of their companions. Let us know the people who saved us, not just as warriors, but as individuals. The crowd turned expectantly to the survivors. After a moment, Lyra stood. She moved to stand beside the 3 empty chairs, her hand resting on the back of one. "Crag the Breaker," she began, her voice carrying across the silent square. "When I first met him, I thought he was just another brutish fighter. All muscle, no subtlety. I was wrong." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Crag understood honor in a way that had nothing to do with codes or oaths. He protected those weaker than himself because that's who he was. When we faced the ice elementals on the bridge, he could have run. We all could have. But he charged forward instead, buying us time with his life. In his final moments, he wasn't thinking about glory or reward. He was thinking about keeping us safe. Her voice cracked slightly. He deserved better than to die on a frozen bridge in the middle of nowhere. But he died as he lived, standing between danger and those who needed protection. That's nobility, even if he never wore a crown. She sat down, and Kale stood. He moved to the second empty chair. "Aldrich Lightbringer was everything a paladin should be," he said. "Brave, righteous, unwavering in his faith. But he was also stubborn, judgmental, and absolutely certain he was right about everything." A few people chuckled softly. "We clashed more than once. He didn't approve of my methods, and I thought his rigid code would get us all killed. But when it mattered most, when the demon servants were pouring onto that bridge and we needed time to escape, Aldrich didn't hesitate. He knew it was his sacrifice. He knew he wouldn't survive. But his faith told him it was the right thing to do, and so he did it." Kyle's jaw tightened. "I used to think faith was a weakness, a crutch for people who couldn't face reality. Aldrich taught me different. Faith gave him the strength to do what needed doing, even when it cost him everything. He died believing he was serving a greater purpose, and maybe he was right. Maybe that's what true faith looks like. The willingness to sacrifice yourself for something bigger than your own survival." Kyle sat, and Morrigan rose slowly. She approached the third chair, her fingers trailing across its back. "Thorgrim Ironstone," she said softly, "was the heart of our group. We didn't realize it at the time, but he was. Every time someone was hurt, he healed them. Every time we despaired, he offered hope. Every time we fought, he was there, keeping us alive, keeping us together." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm a mage. I deal in power, in forces that can reshape reality. But all my power, all my knowledge, couldn't do what Thorgrim did in the end. He gave everything, not just his life, but his very soul, to destroy the demon. He channeled so much divine energy through himself that there was nothing left. No body to bury, no remains to honor. Just light, and then nothing." A tear rolled down her cheek. "He was the best of us, the kindest, the most selfless. And he died alone in that dark place, burning himself away so we could live. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that sacrifice, and I know I'll fall short. But I'll try, because that's what he would have wanted. Not gratitude, not glory, just for us to keep going, to keep helping people, to make his sacrifice mean something. She sat down heavily, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fires and the distant howl of the mountain wind. Then slowly, people began to stand. One by one, the townspeople rose to their feet, a silent gesture of respect and remembrance. They stood in the cold night air, honoring 3 strangers who had become heroes. 3 heroes who had become legends. Elder Grimshaw's voice broke the silence. We will build a monument. Here, in the town square, 6 figures standing together. Crag the Breaker, Aldrich Lightbringer, and Thorgrim Ironstone. These 3 at the center, but the 3 that lived also sacrificed to save us. All shall be represented, so that every child born in Black Peak will know the names, will know what they did, what you all did. They will know the price of our peace. The crowd murmured agreement, and slowly, people began to disperse. The feast was over, the remembrance complete. Tomorrow would bring the formal memorial, but tonight had been about something more personal, about sharing grief and gratitude, about making the fallen real to people who had never known them. The 3 survivors remained at the table long after the crowd had gone. They sat in silence, staring at the 3 empty chairs, each lost in their own thoughts. I keep thinking about what comes next, Kyle finally said. We came here as strangers, did a job, and now we're supposed to just move on? Find the next contract, the next adventure? That's what adventurers do, Lyra said, but there was no conviction in her voice. We're not just adventurers anymore, Morrigan said quietly. We're survivors. We're the ones who lived when others died. That changes things. Does it? Lyra asked. Or do we just tell ourselves that to make the guilt easier to bear? It's not guilt, Kale said firmly. We didn't kill them. The demon did. The circumstances did. We survived because they made sure we would. That doesn't make it easier, Lyra whispered. No, Morrigan agreed. It doesn't, but it's the truth. And we owe them the truth, at least. They fell silent again, but it was a companionable silence now. The silence of people who had been through hell together and come out the other side changed, scarred, but alive. I'm leaving tomorrow, Lyra said eventually. After the memorial. I need to go home, back to the forests. I need to remember what peace feels like. Kyle nodded. I'm heading east. There's a village that's been having trouble with bandits. They need someone who knows how to fight, how to protect. Of course you are, Morrigan said with a sad smile. Always the protector. What about you? Lyra asked. South, Morrigan said. To the great library. I need to understand what we fought, what Thorgrim destroyed. If there are more demons like that one, if there are more ancient places that could wake them, someone needs to know. Someone needs to be prepared. So we're all leaving, Kyle said, going our separate ways. We were always going to, Lyra pointed out. We're not a permanent party. We never were. Weren't we, though? Morrigan asked. For a little while, at least. We became something up there in those mountains. Something more than just 6 people working together. We became a family, Kale said quietly. And like all families, we lost members. But the ones who remain, we're still connected. We always will be. Lyra reached out and took Morrigan's hand. Morrigan reached for Kale's. They sat there, 3 survivors linked together, honoring the bonds forged in blood and battle and sacrifice. We should get some sleep, Lyra finally said. Tomorrow will be hard. They rose and made their way back to the inn, but none of them went to their separate rooms immediately. Instead, they gathered in the common room, where the fire still burned low. They sat together, sharing a bottle of wine, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Kale told stories about his childhood in the village that had been destroyed, about the ranger who had trained him, about the years he'd spent learning to survive in the wilderness. Morrigan spoke of her apprenticeship to a master mage, of the years of study and practice, of the moment she'd first successfully cast a spell and felt the raw power of magic flowing through her. Lyra shared fragments of her past, carefully chosen pieces that revealed just enough to be honest without being vulnerable. As the night deepened, their conversation turned to their fallen companions. They shared memories from the journey. Crag's terrible jokes, Aldrich's morning prayers, Thorgrim's endless patience with their bickering. They laughed and cried and remembered, keeping the dead alive through stories. "Do you think they knew?" Morrigan asked as dawn began to lighten the sky. "In those final moments, do you think they knew it would work? That we'd succeed?" "Aldrich knew," Kyle said with certainty. "His faith wouldn't let him doubt." "Thorgrim knew," Morrigan agreed. "He told me, right before, he said the Stone Father had shown him the path. He knew what he had to do." "And Crag?" Lyra asked. Kale smiled sadly. "Crag didn't care if it would work. He just knew it had to be done, so he did it. That was enough for him." "They were braver than I'll ever be," Lyra said softly. "They were braver than any of us," Morrigan agreed. "But we're the ones who have to live with that. We're the ones who have to carry their memory forward." "Then we'd better make it count," Kale said. They sat together as the sun rose, 3 survivors watching the dawn of a new day, knowing it was a dawn their companions would never see. The memorial service was held at noon in the town square. The entire population of Black Peak turned out, along with people from the surrounding farms and settlements who had heard the news. Elder Grimshaw led the ceremony, speaking of sacrifice and heroism, of the debt the town owed to the fallen. The 3 survivors stood at the front, representing their lost companions. When it came time to speak, each of them shared one final memory. Lyra told of Crag's gentleness with the White Dragon's injured wormling, how the brutal fighter had knelt in the snow and spoken softly to the frightened creature, his massive hands surprisingly gentle. Kale described Aldrich's moment of doubt in the fortress, when the paladin had admitted he was afraid, that he didn't know if his faith would be enough. And then how he'd squared his shoulders, gripped his sword, and walked forward anyway. Morrigan recounted Thorgrim's last words to her. "Tell them it was worth it. Tell them I'd do it again." She had to pause, overcome with emotion before she could continue. "He wanted you to know that he didn't regret it, that saving you, saving all of you, was worth any price." When the ceremony ended, people filed past the 3 empty chairs, each leaving a small token: a flower, a coin, a carved figure, a written prayer. The pile of offerings grew until it overflowed, a physical manifestation of the town's gratitude and grief. That evening, the 3 survivors shared one final meal together at the frozen hearth. Marta had prepared their favorite dishes, and they ate slowly, savoring both the food and the company. "I have something for each of you," Lyra said when the meal was finished. She reached into her pack and pulled out 2 small objects. To Kyle, she gave one of her daggers, not her primary weapons, but a well-made blade nonetheless. "So you'll have something sharp when your arrows run out." To Morrigan, she gave a small wooden carving of an owl, intricate and beautiful. "I made it during my watch one night. You were always going on about how owls were the wisest creatures. Seemed fitting." Kale smiled and produced his own gifts. To Lyra, he gave a compass. so you can always find your way, even in the deepest forest. To Morrigan, he offered a small leather-bound journal. For your research, for recording what we learned so others don't have to learn it the hard way. Morrigan's gifts were more practical but no less meaningful. To Lyra, she gave a ring enchanted with a minor protective spell. It won't stop a sword, but it might turn a knife. Stay safe out there. To Kyle, she offered a small crystal that glowed with a soft light. It'll never run out, never fade, so you'll always have light in the darkness. They sat together, holding their gifts, understanding that these were more than just objects. They were promises. To remember, to honor, to carry forward what they'd learned and experienced together. We should promise to meet again, Morgan said. In a year, maybe, back here in Black Peak to see the monument they're building. A year, Cale agreed. Same time, same place. I'll be here, Lyra said, if I'm still alive. You'll be alive, Morgan said firmly. We all will. We didn't survive all that just to die in some random encounter. We're too stubborn for that. They laughed, and it felt good. It felt like healing, like the first step towards something resembling normalcy. But when they finally retired to their rooms, each of them lay awake for a long time, thinking about the morning, about the goodbyes that were coming, about the uncertain future that awaited them. Dawn came too quickly. The three survivors met in the inn's common room as the sun was just beginning to rise. They'd already packed their belongings, already settled their accounts with Marta. There was nothing left to do but leave. The townspeople had gathered in the square to see them off, despite the early hour. Elder Grimshaw stood at the front of the crowd, his blind eyes somehow finding each of them. You came as strangers, he said. You leave as heroes. Black Peak will never forget what you did, what your companions sacrificed. You will always have a home here, should you need one. Thank you, Cale said, speaking for all of them. For everything. The crowd parted, creating three paths, one leading west toward the forests, one east toward the lowlands, one south toward the distant cities. The survivors looked at each other, and in that moment, they all felt it. The weight of what they were about to do, the finality of this parting. Lyra moved first, embracing Morrigan tightly. Stay safe, Mage. Don't let your research consume you. Stay hidden, Rogue. Don't let your past catch up with you. Lyra turned to Kyle, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, something she never would have done when they first met. Keep protecting people, Ranger. The world needs more like you. Keep surviving, Lyra. That's what you do best. Morrigan and Cale's goodbye was quieter, but no less meaningful. Find what you're looking for in those books, Cale said. And when you do, use it to help people. I will, and you, don't be a stranger. Send word when you can. Let us know you're alive. Same to you both. They stood together for one last moment. Three people who had been strangers just weeks ago, who had become comrades, then friends, then something deeper. Survivors bound together by shared trauma and loss and triumph. 1 year, Morgan said. Back here, we promise. We promise, Lyra and Kyle echoed. And then, because there was nothing left to say, they turned and walked away. Lyra headed west, her green cloak blending with the forest shadows. Cale went east, his bow across his shoulders, his stride purposeful. Morrigan turned south, her staff in hand, her pack heavy with books and supplies. The townspeople watched them go, these three heroes who had saved them, until they disappeared from view. Then, slowly, they returned to their homes, to their lives, to the peace that had been purchased with blood and sacrifice. Lyra walked for an hour before she stopped and looked back. Black Peak was just a smudge in the distance now, smoke rising from its chimneys. The mountains loomed above it, beautiful and terrible. She thought of Crag, Aldrich, and Thorgrim, still up there in those peaks, their bodies claimed by the stone and ice. She thought of Kale and Morrigan, already miles away in different directions. "We did it," she whispered to the wind. "We saved them. I hope that's enough. I hope you're at peace." The wind carried her words away, and she turned back to the forest path. There would be time for grief later, time for processing and healing. For now, she just needed to keep moving forward. That's what survivors did. Kale climbed to the top of a ridge and paused, looking back at the mountains. He could just barely see Black Peak, a tiny settlement dwarfed by the peaks around it. He thought about the people there, going about their lives without fear now. He thought about the children who would grow up safe because of what 6 strangers had done. "It was worth it," he said aloud, as if Aldrich could hear him. "Your sacrifice, Thorgrim's sacrifice, Crag's sacrifice, it was worth it. I'll make sure it stays worth it. I'll keep protecting people. I'll make sure your deaths meant something." He touched the dagger Lyra had given him, the ring from Morrigan. He wasn't alone, not really. He carried his companions with him, the living and the dead. He turned east and continued walking. Morrigan stopped at a crossroads and pulled out the journal Kale had given her. She had left the first draft with the people of Black Peak. She opened it to the first page and began to write. "This is the account of what happened in the mountains above Black Peak in the winter of the demon's awakening. 6 adventurers answered a call for help. 3 survived. This is their story, and the story of those who fell so others might live." She paused, thinking about Thorgrim's final moments, the light that had consumed him, the peace on his face as he gave everything to destroy the demon. "I'll make sure people know," she promised. "I'll make sure your sacrifice isn't forgotten. I'll learn everything I can about demons and ancient evils, and I'll teach others, so that maybe next time fewer people have to die." She closed the journal and looked south, toward the distant cities and the great library that awaited her. She thought of Lyra in her forests, Kale in his villages, each of them carrying forward the legacy of what they'd done together. "1 year," she said softly. "I'll see you both in 1 year." She touched the wooden owl Lyra had given her, the journal from Kyle. She wasn't alone. None of them were. She started walking south. 3 survivors, 3 paths, 3 futures. But one shared past, one shared grief, one shared triumph. They had walked into darkness together and emerged into light, changed forever by what they'd experienced, by what they'd lost, by what they'd saved. The mountains stood eternal and uncaring, their peaks touching the sky. Snow fell softly, covering the paths the survivors had taken, erasing their footprints. But the story remained, carved into the memories of those who had lived it, written in the grateful hearts of those who had been saved, and soon to be immortalized in stone in Black Peak's town square. 3 heroes had fallen. 3 heroes had survived. And the world continued to turn, full of darkness and light, danger and hope, death and life. Somewhere in the deep forests, a wood elf rogue moved silently through the trees, carrying her grief and her daggers with equal care. Somewhere in the eastern lowlands, a human ranger stood watch over a village, his bow ready, his heart determined to prevent another tragedy. Somewhere on the southern roads, a human mage walked toward knowledge and understanding, seeking to turn loss into wisdom, death into meaning. And somewhere in the high mountains, in a town called Black Peak, people lived and loved and laughed, safe in the knowledge that when darkness came, there were those who would stand against it, that heroes existed, even if they were just ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things. That sacrifice meant something. That courage mattered, that even in the darkest places light could prevail. The story of the Obsidian Citadel was over, but the stories of those who had survived it, those were just beginning. See what happens to the survivors in the next volume.
Wow, did you guys see that coming? So many lives lost. So much happened. The fighting, the sacrifices, the bonds, and the promise to go home, recoup, refit, maybe get a little bit stronger, and return here in a year from now at this very village to see what else is in store. I will give you a little bit of a hint. There are other citadels throughout the land that must be shattered and broken to break the potential curse that may be coming. Thank you for listening to the Obsidian Citadel Part 3. Like, comment, subscribe. These are all D&D adventures I've run. A series of one-shots. Eventually, I will do a campaign story. I'm in the middle of running a Tomb of Annihilation right now. I just finished up a full homebrew campaign. That one is about to roll into a brand new campaign. So maybe we'll do that homebrew campaign as one of the stories here. There is a lot going on in that one, so it'll be interesting to put the script together because I have pages and pages and pages of DM notes. But with that, once again, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for listening all the way through, and you guys have a great day.